From the moment she was born in the Cape Province of South Africa in 1932, Jeanne was different. Whilst her friends fell in love with pop stars and actors, she was mad about explorers and foreign correspondents. Having been the daughter of a war widow, she began defying convention from a very early age by working to support her family. Her career in journalism began with a holiday job in the Cuttings Library of the Natal Daily News. Then, with her Bachelor of Arts History major in tow, she hopped on a boat to England. Jeanne is the perfect example of someone who worked their way to the top, and she did a variety of odd jobs throughout Europe in her 20s. It was her involvement with the Italian film industry that had her rubbing shoulders with the young Sophia Loren and led her into the world of public relations. She described Sophia having a tiny little man with her that I assumed was her partner, so when we arrived at the Savoy, I booked them a double room. That night the man was sitting in the foyer in a huge armchair. He explained he was actually her uncle. It was the most awkward thing in the world. After working with the Italian, Jeanne could cope with anything. It was her calming influence and a reputation for being able to handle the biggest stars of Hollywood that helped Jeanne get a job as a press officer with Republic Pictures. She looked after the likes of Steve Cochran, one of Hollywood's bad boys, who was constantly surrounded by scandals and young women. It was because of Steve that Jeanne spent Christmas Day with Elizabeth Taylor. I was looking after Steve after he'd had a heart attack, and when Elizabeth Taylor had found him in London, he had invited her to spend Christmas Day with us. Elizabeth was uncommonly beautiful and terribly nice. We got along due to being the same age, knowing the same people, and according to Elizabeth, having the same problems, as we were both top-heavy with very, very skinny legs. She was then recruited by Universal International Films of America, and in 1957 she received a call from Arthur P. Jacobs, whose company was handling Marilyn Monroe's publicity. He offered her a job as Marilyn's Girl Friday. Marilyn had purchased the rights to a play by Terence Rattigan called The Prince and the Showgirl, and hired Laurence Olivier, a famous British actor turned director, to make it into a film. This catapulted Jeanne into the thick of a story that later became the basis for the film My Week with Marilyn. Troubles began with Monroe's spur-of-the-moment marriage to her then-boyfriend, American playwright Arthur Miller, and then the madness ensued. Arthur leaving on their honeymoon resulted in Monroe totally breaking down. Jeanne explained, "To say things were a mess was an understatement. Marilyn was impossible to get out of bed in the morning, and totally incapable of being anywhere on time. This resulted in a battle of the egos between her and Olivier, who was a huge name at the time and was not used to being kept waiting for 5 hours. And her acting coach Paula Strasberg only succeeded in adding fuel to the fire. She was a very fine actress and wonderful in the movie, but God, she was impossible." Though Jeanne had quite a bit of fun in PR, she wanted to try something else, and became more involved in some serious journalistic enterprises, though breaking into the business proved quite difficult. It started with a job as a press and radio information officer in Geneva, which involved doing a radio broadcast for the English-speaking world that covered the atomic conference. However, it was only after being sat next to Mike Hodges at a dinner party that Jeanne was given a chance to break into television. She started off at ABC TV as a scriptwriter and then subsequently became a researcher. During her time at the ABC, Jeanne worked on several late-night chat shows, including The Eamon Andrews Show and its experimental forerunner, Gazette. This is how Jeanne became involved with one of the most iconic rock bands of all time. Paul McCartney's younger brother, Mike McGeer, and his band The Scaffold were regulars on Gazette. Through this she came to know his father, whom she described as a lovely man. Sometime later he proposed to her, an offer that she sadly declined. Later, when working for the Eamon Andrews Show, Jeanne worked with the Beatles themselves. The band had just returned from their wildly successful American tour, and Beatlemania was ripe. They had already been booked on the show for a performance, an extended interview. However, in the contract, the program had managed to persuade Brian Epstein to let them make a documentary called The Beatles Are Back. They followed them around for their first weekend back in London, in what could be described as a style that became the beginnings of reality television. As exciting as this venture was, it was not always as glamorous as it seemed, and Jeanne described a situation where she got a black eye trying to get through to the Teddington studios because there were crowds of teenage girls outside and one of them bashed me in the face. Then from 1965 to 1966, Jeanne worked for Granada Television. They were producing a crime series for a current affairs program called World in Action. She was hired because due to her non-judgmental personality, she got along well with criminals. This experience also provided her with an opportunity rarely presented to women at the time, learning how to direct, because whilst the director was a lovely, brilliant man and a fantastic journalist, he was also a drunk. Jeanne remembers that he was often so pissed by lunchtime that we, the crew, would work like mad to cover for him. Up until this point, Jeanne was always the researcher, never the reporter. Women were not taken seriously enough to be placed in such an important role, and when she finally did start reporting, they would always dub her voiceover with that of a man's, because she didn't sound authoritative enough. Her big break came in 1966 thanks to a case of laryngitis. She was working for Rediffusion Television on a show called This Week. One day, the man they usually recorded over her became ill, and they couldn't find anyone to replace him at such short notice. So, the editors suggested that they just use her voice, and so began her career as one of the first ever women reporters. By now, Jeanne was an established reporter, yet despite this, her endless applications to work at the BBC were rejected. A job with the BBC was considered such an honour that often women with master's degrees from the best universities in the world accepted very minor positions as secretaries, just because it was a privilege to be on the payroll. Jeanne was offered a job as a reporter on a show called Man Alive in 1968. This was at a time where some changes had begun to occur within the BBC and women were given more opportunities as a result. From there, all the doors were thrown open and her career began to develop in leaps and bounds. Not that this came easily. Her transition to being behind the camera involved a lot of hard work, and the projects she was involved with presented constant challenges. However, it was all made worthwhile when in 1980, Jeanne achieved her dream of becoming a foreign correspondent. She was the producer, director, and a reporter on a documentary called One Way Ticket to Hulampong about the child slave trade in Thailand. Jeanne continued to work on various projects with the BBC until her retirement in 1992. Today, Jeanne LaChard lives tucked away in Notting Hill, surrounded by suitcases full of photographs and memories of the spectacular life she has led. Nothing in her life just happened. She has fought for every opportunity she was ever given, and it was naught but her own blood, sweat, and tears, and an underlying passion for journalism that made her career so successful. Jeanne is the epitome of what it means to be a journalist.